I should probably start with the part everyone keeps asking me about. The moment she leaned in, brushed her fingers through my hair, and whispered, "I choose you." But that wasn't where the story actually began. The beginning was quieter, almost forgettable, if it hadn't rearranged something inside me. It was last winter, the kind that makes metal ache and mornings feel heavier. I was doing weekend shifts at my friend Amir's repair shop, the kind of place that always smelled like burnt solder and old coffee. I liked the routine. No drama, no surprises. And then she walked in. I knew of her, obviously. Amir's older sister, the one he always talked about like she was carved from glass and ambition. But stories don't prepare you for the real person. Not for the way she stepped inside like she'd been here before, but didn't quite belong anymore. Not for the way the cold followed her in, clinging to her coat before melting into the warm, dusty air. She looked steady, the kind of steady that comes from having unraveled more than once and learned how to tie herself back together. Mid-40s, hair pulled back not to impress anyone, just to get through the day. There was a faint crease between her brows, not anger, something closer to a private thought she wasn't finished with. She saw me first. "Amir's not here," I blurted, even though she hadn't asked yet. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then the tools scattered on the desk. "I can see that." I laughed too quickly. She didn't. What struck me was how she didn't rush. Everyone else did, customers, delivery guys, even Amir himself. But she stood there, taking in the room like she was reading it. Or maybe reading me. She asked for something simple, a battery check, nothing special. But the way she handed me her keys, her fingers brushed mine. Probably accidental. Probably. But she pulled back a heartbeat late, as though noticing something she couldn't decide to acknowledge or ignore. While I worked, she wandered around the shop, tracing a fingertip along a dusty shelf, stopping to inspect an old radio that never worked but Amir refused to throw away. Her presence filled the room differently. The air felt heavier, but not in a bad way, like the silence between us meant something if I listened closely enough. I caught her watching me once. Just once. She didn't look away fast enough. I pretended not to notice, but my hands suddenly didn't know how to be steady. I dropped a screw. It clattered on the floor loud enough to make her lips twitch, not a smile. Exactly. More like she wanted to, but wasn't sure she should. "You okay there?" she asked. "Yeah, just..." I bent to grab the screw, bumping my head on the counter on the way back up. "Just doing great." She exhaled through her nose, the softest, most controlled almost laugh I've ever heard. But it warmed the space more than the heater did. When I finished, I held out her keys. Something in the way she reached for them made me pause. She didn't take them right away. Instead, she looked at me with this strange mix of distance and focus, like she was remembering something I hadn't lived through yet. A moment stretched. Too long for strangers. Too long for my friend's sister. She finally took the keys, her fingers brushing mine again. This time on purpose, or I thought it was. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even bold. Just a tiny, intentional softness that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. She thanked me and stepped outside into the cold, leaving the smell of winter and something faintly sweet behind her. I kept working after she left, but my mind stayed stuck on that moment. The pause, the almost smile, the way her touch lingered longer than it should have. And I didn't know it then, but that small, quiet moment, that was the first time I realized I wasn't going to stop thinking about her. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Honestly, I told myself I wouldn't think about her at all, that she was just a moment passing through a boring workday. But 2 days later, near closing time, the door chimed, and there she was again. Same steady posture. Same unreadable expression. Different energy. She didn't step fully inside at first, like she was checking to see who was here before committing. When she saw it was just me, something in her shoulders shifted, not relaxing, not tensing, something in between. A quiet permission. "Amir said you could help me with a cabinet for my studio," she said. It fell apart. I bought the wrong screws. Or maybe the wrong everything. A studio. That fit her. She looked like someone who created things, then judged them too harshly. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "Let me grab my stuff." We walked to her place. It was only 3 blocks away, cold wind threading between us. She kept her hands in her coat pockets the whole time. I kept mine out, like an idiot, because I didn't know what to do with them. My fingers kept brushing the tools hanging from my belt, like I needed proof I belonged here. Her studio was a sunlit room with high windows and too many unfinished projects. Paint tubes half-squeezed. Canvases leaning against walls like exhausted bodies. A mug of tea, untouched and gone cold. "This is where I pretend to be productive," she murmured. "Looks pretty real to me." She hummed. The sort of sound people make when they want to believe you, but know better. I got to work on the cabinet. She hovered nearby at first, arms crossed, hip leaning against a cluttered table. She didn't talk much. Every answer she gave felt filtered, trimmed down. But I could feel her watching me again, quietly, carefully, like she hadn't decided whether I was a problem or a solution. At one point, she reached for a paintbrush but paused halfway, staring at her own hand like it had betrayed her mid-motion. A tiny hesitation, but it told me more than anything she'd said aloud. "You okay?" I asked, softer than intended. She blinked, pulled her hand back. Long day. It wasn't the truth. Or it wasn't the whole truth. The tiredness in her eyes wasn't from hours, it was from years. I tried to focus on the cabinet, but she walked behind me and crouched beside the workbench, too close. I could see the tiny flecks of dried paint on her knuckles. The faint tremor when she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The way she sighed, not loud, more like the air escaped without her permission. "You don't have to stay long," she said suddenly. "I know you have better things to do." "I don't," I admitted. She glanced at me. Not a long look, not dramatic. Just a single flick of her eyes that felt like someone opening a door an inch. When the cabinet was almost done, she knelt beside me to hold a panel steady. Our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. The silence grew heavier, but not uncomfortable, more like it was filling with something unnamed. The final screw tightened with a click. Her breath hitched. She let go of the panel a second too late. "Thank you," she said, voice lower than before. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and turned to her. She was still kneeling, fingers resting on the cabinet like she'd forgotten they were there. For the first time, she looked up at me without her guard, without calculation. Just tired, just human, just open. And I knew I shouldn't stare back as long as I did. But I did, because she didn't look away. It was supposed to be a quick stop, just dropping off the extra hinges she'd asked for. Nothing more. But the sky broke open halfway there, rain slashing sideways, wind pushing against me like I owed it money. By the time I reached her building, I was soaked enough to look like I'd climbed out of a river. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been standing right behind it. "You're drenched," she said, voice sharper with concern than she probably meant it to be. "It's just water," I muttered, trying to laugh it off. She stepped aside, letting me in. Her apartment was dim except for a warm lamp in the corner. The air smelled like rosemary and something buttery. Dinner she hadn't finished, or maybe forgot about entirely. A half-eaten plate sat on the table, her fork abandoned mid-bite. "You could have waited for the rain to stop," she said. "I thought you needed these tonight." "I didn't," she whispered, almost too quietly. Something about that admission did something strange to the room, like the space between us thickened, waiting. She handed me a towel, but instead of walking away, she lingered while I rubbed the water from my hair. Her eyes traced me with careful hesitation, as if she wanted to look and not look at the same time. When I dropped the towel, she reached out and brushed a thumb over a raindrop still clinging to my jaw. A small gesture, but her touch stayed longer than it should have. "Again, you missed a spot," she said. The lie sat between us, soft and trembling. I cleared my throat, needing distance, but not actually moving. "You okay? You seem distracted." She inhaled, then exhaled slowly, eyes slipping to the table. "My ex called earlier." A pause. 3 times. "Oh, he wants to talk," she added. "And I don't know if I want to." There it was, the thing she didn't want to say but couldn't keep in anymore. Her vulnerability wasn't loud. It was a crack in the door, barely open, but enough to feel the draft through. "What did you tell him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." I didn't pick up. The rain hammered harder against the windows. We both looked toward it at the same time, like it gave us permission not to look at each other. Do you want to? I asked softer. Her breath hitched, the exact same sound she'd made when I tightened that last screw in the cabinet. She leaned her hand on the counter, gripping the edge like the question pulled her off balance. I don't know what I want tonight, she said. I just know it isn't him. Her voice dipped at the end, almost swallowed by the rain. Then, footsteps in the hallway outside her door. A man's voice calling a neighbor's name. She stiffened instantly, body going tense with a flash of reflexive fear or memory. She didn't say anything, but her hand found my forearm. Not to pull me closer, not exactly, more like grounding herself. Like my presence steadied her. I stayed still. I didn't move away. When the footsteps faded, she released me, slowly, fingers dragging across my skin as if she realized too late what she was doing. Sorry, she murmured, stepping back. I didn't mean to, I know. Silence. Only the rain filling the gaps. She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression felt close to breaking. A near confession curled behind her lips, but she swallowed it before it could escape. I should have left. I knew that. But when she reached out again, fingertips grazing my wrist, I didn't pull away. Neither did she. And for a breath, just one, it felt like something was about to happen. Something neither of us was ready to name. The rain didn't stop that night. It only softened, turning from violent to steady, like it had settled in to listen with us. Her apartment felt smaller than before, as if the walls had moved closer, pushing us into the same breadth of space. She stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the streetlights bleeding through the wet glass. I stayed near the counter, pretending I was giving her room, pretending I wasn't tracing every tiny shift in her shoulders, every uneven inhale. We weren't touching, but the silence felt like skin on skin. She didn't look at me when she finally said it. What are we doing? Not angry, not accusing, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from ignoring something too long. I swallowed. I don't know. Her fingers pressed into her arms, gripping harder, as if trying to anchor herself to something more solid than the thoughts she was holding back. You're Amir's friend, she whispered. You're Amir's sister. That's not what I meant. I knew, but letting her say it mattered. She turned then, slowly, and for the first time since I walked in, her guard wasn't just lowered, it was gone. Completely gone. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something vast, unsure whether the wind would push her forward or pull her back. You're too young to be caught up in my mess, she said. Maybe, I replied. Maybe not. She flinched at the softness in my voice, like she'd expected deflection or a joke, not directness. She walked past me and sat at the table, fingers tracing the rim of her abandoned plate. She didn't eat, didn't look at me, just circled the rim over and over, like she was outlining something she had no name for. I'm not used to someone noticing, she said after a long silence. Not the way you do. I'm not doing anything, I murmured. That's the problem, she said. You're not trying. You're not pushing. You're just noticing. And it's making everything harder. Another silence, deeper now, heavier. The kind that makes the air feel warm and cold at the same time. I sat across from her. Not close, but close enough that the space between us felt fragile. She lifted her eyes. Her gaze held mine a beat too long. And then another. What do you think this is? She asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because any answer felt wrong. Too bold. Too honest. Too soon. I don't know, I said again. But I know it's not nothing. Her breath trembled, so faint I almost missed it. She leaned back, looked up at the ceiling for a moment, like she was searching for a version of the truth she could live with. This can't happen, she whispered. We haven't done anything. That's not the point, she said, louder this time, not with volume, but with certainty. She finally pushed the cold plate away, the sound sharper than it should have been. She stood, paced once, stopped, turned back to me with a frustrated softness that almost broke me. You make me feel like I'm waking up, she said. And I don't know if I want that. The room stilled. Her hair clung to her cheek from the humidity. Her hands trembled, barely. Her eyes were glassy, but not from tears, from restraint. I took a small step forward. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Him calling today, she said, voice cracked thin. It didn't matter. Not even for a second. And that scares me more than you think. Another silence. The loudest one yet. She looked down at my hands, or maybe at the distance between us. Then she whispered the one line that changed everything, soft enough that the rain almost swallowed it. I don't know how to want something I shouldn't want. She didn't ask me to leave after saying that. Maybe she should have. Maybe I should have. But instead, we both stood there, two people held in place by a sentence that felt too heavy to touch. The rain faded into a murmur. Her breathing steadied. Mine didn't. She stepped away first, moving toward a small wooden drawer near her bookshelf. She hesitated with her fingers on the handle. Not dramatically, just long enough for me to see this wasn't something she opened often. You said something earlier, she murmured, about how this isn't nothing. I nodded, even though she wasn't looking. She pulled the drawer open, sifted through a few envelopes, paused, then took out a single photograph. The edges were soft, worn. She held it face down, pressing her thumb along the corner the way people do when they're not sure whether to share or hide something. When she finally turned the picture over, she didn't hand it to me. She just stared at it, swallowing once, twice. This was 10 years ago, she said. I used to paint people. I loved capturing their faces. Their smallest things. The parts they didn't know were visible. I stepped closer, gently. Who is it? She hesitated, barely, but enough to feel like a shift in gravity. My husband, she said. The word was hung unspoken, but I felt it anyway. She held the photo out then, and I took it carefully. He looked young. Not young like me. Young like someone who had lived just enough to look hopeful about everything ahead. His smile was crooked. His posture relaxed. The kind of man who looked like he laughed easily. She watched me closely, not for my reaction to him, but for what I'd do with this version of her she hadn't shown anyone in a long time. He died 8 years ago, she said. Sudden. No warning. I set the photo down on the table as if it were something alive, something delicate. I'm sorry. She exhaled, the kind of breath people release when someone finally says the simplest words without trying to fix anything. He was younger than me, she added. Everyone judged it. We didn't care. Her throat tightened, not enough for tears, just enough to make her voice slightly uneven. But people talk. They always talk. She stepped back, pressing her fingers to her temple like she was bracing herself. You remind me of him, she said quietly. I froze. Not in your face, she clarified. Not your voice. It's your way of noticing, the way you listen, how you look at things like they matter even if no one else thinks so. She stood there, almost trembling from saying too much or remembering too much. I haven't felt this, she cut herself off, frowning. No, not that. I haven't let myself feel anything in years. I didn't touch her, didn't move, didn't fill the silence with words I couldn't take back. She walked toward the window again, staring out at the wet pavement, the streetlight bending through the droplets like a quiet ghost. When you walked in tonight, she said, voice soft but steady, I realized something I shouldn't have. What? I asked, barely breathing. She turned, and the expression she wore wasn't fear, wasn't longing. It was something deeper, something close to recognition. I'm scared, she whispered, because I don't know if I'm drawn to you, or to the part of myself I buried with him. That line, gentle, devastating, seemed to echo in the dim room, settling into every corner. A car splashed through a puddle outside. A clock ticked once. The air thinned between us. She didn't move toward me, but she didn't pull away either. And maybe that was the moment, the quiet, seismic shift, when everything between us changed without either of us touching a thing. I didn't reach for her right away. The moment was too fragile. One wrong move, and it would splinter into something we'd both pretend never happened. So I stayed where I was, close enough to hear the way her breath shook, far enough that she could still choose distance if she needed it. She held the photo loosely now, not looking at it, not hiding it either. Like she was finally tired of running from the part of herself she kept buried. I shouldn't have said that, she murmured. About why you remind me of him. You should have, I said. It was honest. She let out a soft, broken sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Honesty hasn't been kind to me. Maybe it's the people who weren't kind that made her look at me, really look at me, with an expression that felt like a door opening an inch more. Her eyes softened in the lamplight, the rain still whispering behind us. And then she set the photo down, slow and deliberate, like placing a memory exactly where it belonged rather than where she'd been keeping it all this time. "I don't want to repeat my past," she said. "I'm not your past," I answered. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It felt level, like we were finally standing in the same emotional place, not across a line we kept pretending wasn't there. She moved first. She stepped toward me quietly, almost like she was testing if the floor would hold. When she reached me, she didn't touch my face or my chest or any of the places people go when they're trying to be bold. She touched my hand, just my hand. Her fingers slid into mine with hesitation, then certainty, like she'd finally allowed herself to want something without permission. "I don't know where this goes," she said. "I don't need you to." Her thumb brushed my knuckle, the smallest movement, but it felt bigger than every charged moment before it. She leaned her head slightly, just enough that her forehead hovered near my shoulder, but didn't rest there yet. The air between us warmed, softened, settled. "You deserve someone uncomplicated," she whispered. "And you deserve someone who sees you as you are right now," I replied. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, the tension in her shoulders melted. Not completely, not dramatically, just enough to show she was letting herself collapse, not into me, but into the truth neither of us could deny anymore. I guided her gently to sit on the edge of the couch. She didn't let go of my hand, not even when she exhaled shakily and leaned, finally, against my side. Her hair brushed my jaw. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't try to define anything. We just breathed together. No declarations, no promises, no sweeping romance. Just two people who had run out of excuses. A quiet collapse. Her fingers tightened around mine a little, then loosened in a way that felt like trust. Outside, the rain eased into a soft hush, like it was giving us space to exist without interruption. After a long stretch of silence, she whispered, barely audible, "Stay just for tonight." Not a plea, not a confession, just a truth she was finally ready to let out. And I did. Not because the moment demanded it, but because we'd earned it, slowly, painfully, hopelessly. It felt like the end of something, and the beginning of something we weren't afraid of anymore. I think what surprises me most, looking back now, is how quietly everything changed. How slow it was. How gentle. If you had asked me then, I would have said nothing was happening at all. Just two people existing in the same orbit, learning how not to flinch around each other's honesty. But now, with distance, I can see all the tiny shifts, the ones that didn't feel like anything until they suddenly felt like everything. For a long time, I thought love had to be loud to be real. Big gestures, dramatic moments, overwhelming certainty. She taught me the opposite without ever trying to. With her, it was the pauses that mattered, the seconds after a joke when her smile lingered, the way she looked down when she wasn't ready to say something out loud, the softness that slipped through when she forgot to protect herself. And somewhere in the middle of all that, something in me softened too. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding myself together until the first night she leaned her head against my shoulder. We didn't kiss. We didn't even talk. She just rested there, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I remember thinking, oh, so this is what safety feels like. I didn't know how much I missed it. Our story didn't explode, it unfolded. There wasn't a moment I could point to and say, that's when it happened. It was more like waking up one day and noticing that the room smelled like her shampoo because she'd been there often enough that it lingered. Or realizing that my playlist had slowly collected the songs she hummed without noticing. Or catching myself reaching for my phone because I wanted to tell her something small, something ordinary, something that didn't matter except it did. She changed the way I understood connection. Before her, I thought love required certainty. Now, I think it just requires presence, the willingness to stay, even in the quiet parts of someone's life. She was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to earn my place. I could just be there. And if I changed, she did too. She stopped apologizing for needing someone. She let me see the parts of her she used to hide. And the thing is, I never asked her to. She just started trusting that I wouldn't run. We didn't promise each other forever. We didn't wrap our story with a perfect bow. But we chose something real, a connection that grew slowly, quietly, patiently. Something honest enough to hold on to and soft enough not to break us. Looking back, the moment that stays with me most isn't dramatic at all. It's just the two of us sitting side by side, saying nothing, sharing the kind of silence that feels like understanding. That's when I knew, whatever this was, it had already become part of us. And if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?